Good day. I'm Joseph Noah. I'm a medical doctor and a biochemist, and I'm the author of Document X, Direct Evidence of God's Existence. Now I just want to have a look at the Quranic viewpoint on evolution. But before I do that, there's two important words I need to define. The one is Rab. Rab is commonly translated as Lord. In other words, it means some kind of a superior being and can even mean a master of the house and so on. But in Arabic, the word goes much deeper, the meaning of the word. It also refers to the one that nourishes a thing, provides it with the potential which allows it to move from one stage to another stage until it reaches its goal of relative completion. It also means to improve, to arrange, and to fine-tune. And this is important because it means when living things appear, they appear in an imperfect, crude, and simple form, then undergo stages which result in improvement and change until their goal is reached, the goal of relative completion. Now this definition is complemented by another important word, creation. Now again, in English this means to bring into existence something from nothing. But in Arabic, again, it goes deeper. It means to fashion, to shape, and includes the idea of a thing fitting in a scheme of things, which means to adapt. And this fashioning and shaping and adapting happens over long periods of time. In other words, it means to evolve. So combining these two words, the Quran not only speaks about the creator that creates, but also about an evolver that evolves. Now, if you study the Quran, you find it describes a creation process which is evolutionary in nature. It recognizes three principal phases: a chemical phase, biological evolution, and cultural evolution. Now, let's just look at chemical evolution. Chemical evolution involves gradual build-up of chemicals to more complex forms. There was a series of chemical reactions over hundreds of thousands of years, resulting in ever more complex molecules until the building blocks of life appeared, such as amino acids, bases, and sugars. Now, the Quran referred to this non-living chemical stage in a number of verses, but I'm just going to quote a few. It refers to the origin of life from water in 25:54, the origin of life from an extract of clay in 23:12, Note, not clay, but an extract of clay. In other words, the active principles within the clay, the chemical compounds or the minerals within the clay. And 31:20, it refers to the origin of life from the fundamental constituents of the earth arranged in layers. Now, these are probably crystal structures. Now, crystals are layers of constituents of the earth. In other words, identical rows of chemicals and atoms arranged in a recurrent form. And these crystal structures is thought to have played a major role in the origin of life. In 37:11, the Quran says he evolved you from sticky clay. Now, sticky is precisely the word used by biochemists to describe the reactive potential of carbon. Carbon is said to be sticky because of its remarkable ability to link up with other atoms and produce ever more complex molecules. Now, you might argue, and justifiably so, that it requires a leap of faith to translate clay as sticky carbon. But you have to consider other verses as well. The primitive atmosphere, billions of years ago, contained a large amount of chemical compounds, organic compounds, meaning they contain carbon. And when the rain came down, these compounds mixed with the earthly matter, and this is stated in 23:18. Moreover, we said earlier that according to 23:12, life evolved from an extract of clay. So it's conceivable, therefore, that this stickiness, this sticky clay refers to the stickiness of the chemical compounds containing carbon within the clay. And as I said earlier, carbon played a pivotal role in the origin of life. Now, once amino acids formed and bases and sugars, these are the building blocks or the molecules of life, such as DNA and proteins. These important compounds became enclosed in what we call cells, three-dimensional units. And these cells reveal the basic characteristics of life. The appearance of these cells is still a tantalizing mystery, but they mark the beginning of biological life. Now, for about 3 billion years, life remained confined to the unicellular form and to the oceans. And about 600 million years ago, as a result of a number of factors, environmental changes, genetic mutations, duplications of genes, an endless variety of creatures appeared. And the Quran sums up these events in 24:45, which states, "He it is who evolved every animal from water, and He has willed that some of them move or crawl on their bellies, and some of them move or walk on all two, and some of them move or walk on all four." God creates what He wills in accordance with His universal plan. So we see there the conjunction "and then" appears several times in this verse. The Arabic translation "wa" again has a much deeper meaning. Besides conveying the idea of coordination of activities and simultaneous events, it also denotes the idea of sequence, of order, of one stage merging into another. Thus it accommodates the following interpretation. If you look at one example, creatures moving on their bellies, say amphibians for example. If some of its members remain in a particular area, in the native area, they would have probably remained unchanged. But if other members migrated to a different region where the environmental conditions were more likely to be different, they would have changed, in other words, adapt to the new environment, and may have given rise to a new species, such as reptilian dinosaurs, more particularly bipedal dinosaurs, which although possessing 4 limbs, they walked on all 2. So this verse discerns 4 successive stages of animal evolution. Ultimately derived from water, creatures evolve into 3 broad classes. Those moving or crawling on their bellies, such as the marine invertebrates, arthropods, worms, jellyfish. Fish itself and amphibians may be included in this definition because they can be said to move or crawl on their bellies. And the second form of development are the insects and the amphibians and reptiles, including bipedal dinosaurs. As I said earlier, although they had 4 limbs, they walked on all 2, and we know their descendants are the birds which walk on all 2. And the 4-footed animals are those which are more developed, like the reptiles and the mammals. Now consider the following verse, 87 and 2 and 3. "He it is who originates every living thing, thereupon shapes and proportions it symmetrically, with a just adaptation of its organ parts to the performance of its functions. He who determines the nature of everything, then evolves it in accordance with that nature." So it sounds like a mouthful, but what the verse basically states is that the features of an organism is constantly changing, being reshaped and resized so that they become consistent to the functions they are meant to perform. In other words, to adapt. And another important word in this verse is that of symmetry. Now, symmetry concerns the body plan of an organism so that it is designed in such a way that its organ parts and tissues assume the correct relationship and the correct positions. For example, if you look at the human limbs, the arms, for example, the left arm is a mirror image of the right arm, and they have corresponding shapes and sizes, and they are located at their correct position. Now, if you look at the key words in this verse here, to fashion, to shape, to adapt, and the concept of symmetry can be summed up in 2 important words: biological evolution. In 80 verse 19, which we discussed before, the Quran states that the fertilized egg contains the plan, in the context the genetic plan, which decides the future features of the embryo and hence determine its species type. Now these changes are not visible to the naked eye and may be termed microevolution. But in 87:2-3 tells us that there are ongoing changes in the design of the animal as a result of environmental pressures and evolutionary challenges. And such changes are visible to the naked eye and may be termed macroevolution. It follows that according to the Quran, since the structure of the animal is constantly changing, then the genetic instructions which dictate those changes must also change. In other words, the DNA molecule, which are none other than a set of instructions, must change, it must mutate. And this is an astonishing deduction that the Quran describes here one of the key features of the DNA molecule. In fact, we can derive other essential features of DNA from chapter 4, verse 1 and other verses, which describes DNA as a complicated chemical entity which has a paired structure. It transmits information, it can replicate. So the Quran therefore describes the key features of the DNA molecule. You remember also that mutations are local chemical changes in the DNA, and mutations is one of the key evolutionary mechanisms. Now, the mechanism of evolution is expanded upon in the following verse in 28:68, which states, "The creation processes which are beneficial for a species are selected through a process of contention for superiority in beauty and excellence, and occur according to the law and plan of thy sustainer. They, the species, have no choice in the matter." What is striking here is the terms law and plan, which means there's an intelligent law governing the selection and creation processes. Now, the word creation means every conceivable method of creation. And mutations, which is a method of creation, may be included in this definition of creation as it appears in the verse, which follows that only those mutational processes which are beneficial are selected. And that proceeds on the basis on striving for superiority, not just in strength, but also as far as beauty, delight, greater potential are concerned. These evolutionary mechanisms from a Quranic perspective is much broader than classical Darwinian principles, going beyond a mere struggle for survival. There is a struggle towards flexibility, creativity, and progressive evolution. You may put it in this way: creatures are evolving evolvability. Now, the last part of the verse says, "They, the species, have no choice in the matter." So animals cannot decide where to live or what particular lifestyle they must adopt. The lifestyle that they acquire is forced upon them as a result of environmental factors imposed upon them. For instance, our tree-dwelling ancestors that lived millions of years ago had to come down from the trees because there was a drastic drop in tree numbers because of a very dry climate. And this forced them to adapt a terrestrial lifestyle, which eventually led to an upright posture. The word species does not appear in the original Arabic, but I've inserted it, and these are my reasons. If you go to chapter 13, verse 39, it refers to organs which become obliterated, in other words, to vestigial structures, and also indicates or speaks about the transient nature of species. Some become extinct while other groups become established. Then in 22:34 it states, "We have made for every animal species a habitat, and through it you are reminded of God's classification upon it." Now there's a similar verse in the same chapter 22:67, but there's an additional important phrase there which says that you will find no inconsistency in the divine system. Why is this statement important, that there are no inconsistencies in the divine system? In the context, the system of classification of all organisms. There are another two verses which are related to this idea of why I inserted the word species, and that is 6:38 and 71:17. But I will have a look at those verses in more detail when we discuss the genetic evidence of evolution. Now, why is this important? Because in the past, the primates, the great apes, were classed as separate from humans. They were placed in separate groups. But with the advent of genetic techniques and new data, we can no longer hold this position anymore. It's incorrect. Humans today are included with the great apes in one group called the primates. And the reason for this is that we share a sizable chunk of our DNA with the great apes. And there's a host of biological similarities, like forward-pointing eyes, color vision, opposable thumb, the nails, prolonged mother-child relationship, 32 teeth. Now, we see here this undeniable relationship with the great apes. That pattern keeps popping up. We can no longer deny the undeniable. We have to stare reality in the face, and that is our close cousinship with the great apes. But as we go along, I will provide more and more evidence of this claim.